Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper, current high school coach, teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids, and Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press. Omari, my guy, the Pistons season is over. As a beat writer, that means you just get to go on a few-month vacation, right?
We'll eventually get there. I would say off season is pretty sporadic. We'll have like end of season stuff, interviews, exit interviews this week. Next week should be a lot quieter. And then off season is almost like a wave. Like it's quiet, and then you have combine, lottery. Then it's a little quiet. Then you have draft, and then once you get to the draft, then it's just full speed until basically after summer league. But definitely looking forward to going into off-season O mode. Yeah, man, it's been a long season. This is actually my first 82-game season, which is crazy because I've been covering the league for 3.5 years. But when I covered the Grizzlies, I started like 7 or 8 games in. And then my second season got cut short by COVID. And then third was 72 games, also because of COVID. So like a month ago, it kind of hit me. The season feels extra long. Why does the season feel so long? And then I realized it's my first 82-game season. So if you guys want to see the off-season O content and everything that Bryce is doing over at Motor City Hoops, just follow us on Twitter. It's the names I just said, at Motor City Hoops, at Omari Sankofa. And also follow Freep Sports. Subscribe to Freep.com. And make sure you subscribe, rate, comment, and interact with us on whatever you use to listen to our podcast, whether it's Google, Apple, or Spotify. We love the feedback.
And on today's episode, we got a special guest, our first guest for the Pistons Pulse, and I couldn't be more excited. Omari could not be more thrilled. We're going to welcome NBA sideline reporter, writer for The Athletic, host of his own podcast, Hoops Adjacent, and fellow American University alum, my guy, David Aldridge.
Thank you all for having me. Love talking to you.
Absolutely. We're excited to talk Pistons. We're going to recap the season first, DA. And whenever we talk Detroit Pistons around here, everybody wants to talk about Cade Cunningham. We can get into the Rookie of the Year race. I don't know if you have a vote or not, and I know if you do, you probably can't tell us. But let's just talk about Cade Cunningham and what you thought about him this season.
Look, I think he came on and showed you, especially the second half of the season, you know, what the fuss is all about, what the potential is for him and for the franchise. I mean, he certainly looks like a franchise-level altering talent. Right. I mean, he's the ability to see the floor, the ability to score, the ability to facilitate. All of those things came to the fore. And, you know, the future's really bright. My guess, obviously, I haven't polled all the people who are voting. But look, my guess is that it's probably going to be Evan Mobley or Scotty Barnes getting Rookie of the Year. But see, this is what bothers me about these awards is that when you say that, people say, well, you're hating on Cade. No, I'm not hating on Cade. I'm not hating on Cade. You have to look at the whole body of work over an entire season. It's a season award. It's not a 2-month award. It's not a second half of the season award. It's for the full year. And so, you know, he is certainly a foundational piece along with Bay and some of the other guys they have there for a team that I think is going to be better sooner rather than later because the things that they are putting into place in terms of playing with effort, you don't always play well, but you can always play hard. The types of people that they are bringing in, they have tough-minded people, tough-minded kids in there. When the talent level raises up a little bit more, they will take a big leap because they're close in a lot of ways now. You guys have seen their record, you know, the second since the All-Star break. So they're getting there. And Cade's going to be a big part of that. There's everything in his line. If you look at his track, signals a guy that can take 2 or 3 more jumps and be, you know, an elite level player.
DA, just how unique is this Rookie of the Year race where you have a guy in Cade who's averaging 17, 5, and 5 most years? That would probably be good enough for the award. But you have 2 rookies who have not only been very good, but they've been very good on playoff teams. You mentioned Evan Mobley and Scotty Barnes. Have you seen a race like this where you have a guy like Cade who's having a great season in his own right, but you have 2 rookies who are also worthy of the award, and they're also in much better situations. This seems like it's a little bit more unique than your average race.
It's somewhat different to have two. There's been years where you've had a guy drop to a good team and produce right away. But to have two, to your point, it is a little unusual, particularly, Mobley in Cleveland, because, I don't think anybody expected Cleveland to have the turnaround that they've had this year. And he was a big part of that. And that's why I think, when you look at the whole, you have to look at not just the stats and things like that, but how did they impact winning? And this guy clearly has impacted winning. Scotty Barnes has clearly impacted winning. And that's not a criticism of Cade. It's just that that's something that you have to examine when you're thinking about who to give the award to. And I'm a big guy about winning. I don't think they're not playing for participation ribbons, right? The whole point of all of us spending 10 months out of our year every year is to find out who won at the end, right?
Yep.
So that's why we do this. And so if you're impacting winning, I think you get I think more credit, or you get more laudits or plaudits, whatever the word is. So yeah, it is unusual, and certainly, in a more normal year, Cade would probably have a more compelling case. But when you have two guys on winning teams, that kind of makes it more difficult.
So if Cade isn't the rookie of the year, and me and Omari, I think we've talked about this at length. I don't know that either one of us cares whether he wins rookie of the year or not. We've seen what we've wanted to see from the young man. So I want to ask you this, because you said, that you think maybe Mobley or Barnes will win it. Do you think the Pistons and Troy Weaver still made the right pick, though? Because at the end of the day, I think that's what fans need to know and understand is it doesn't matter. It would be nice if Detroit could have the rookie of the year. But did they get the right guy in the draft? Because ultimately that's what matters, like you say, for them to compete sooner rather than later.
Yeah, no, I think they absolutely made the right pick. Because again, the NBA, really all of basketball, is all about guard play now. It's really not about. I love it. It's nice that Jokic and Embiid are head to head for MVP, but they're the exception rather than the norm. The norm is small ball, 5 out, 0 in. And you need a point guard. You need a point guard who can handle the ball, who can score on three levels, and who can facilitate. Again, that word facilitate is so important because you just run so many pick and rolls now in the NBA game. And yes, so to answer your question, yes, they took the right guy. I think they needed a point guard, and he is certainly going to be the guy with the ball in his hands majority of the time going forward, as it should be. And again, that doesn't mean that I hate Evan Mobley or Scotty Barnes or Jalen Green or any of those guys. They're all terrific players. Every team's different. Every team has different needs. And the Pistons needed a point guard, and they got a really good one in Cade Cunningham.
As a member of national media, of course, when you're evaluating teams, and I know everybody's process is different, how much does this play into it? Just the fact that Toronto, Cleveland are probably being watched more simply because they are better. I know the other week, I can't remember who it was, but there was one national media pundit who said, the Pistons are a tough watch, and they have 23 wins. They're not incorrect. If you're a national media guy or casual fan, and you're watching a team, you're probably not going to watch a team that has fewer than 30 wins. But how much does that help Evan and Scotty? Just that they may have been watched more compared to a guy like a Cade or a Jalen Green, where they're still in very firm rebuild situations.
I don't necessarily. I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think people who have votes watch everybody because you have to watch everybody. And people who love basketball watch everybody because you want to see. Cade Cunningham, who's the first pick. I want to see what all the fuss was about, right? And you want to see Jalen Green on a very young team in Houston. So yeah, I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think people who follow the league follow everybody. And want to see not only what they're good at, but what they need to work on. Where their struggles are. Because that informs you how teams are going to guard that player going forward. So if a guy can't make a three, if he struggles shooting threes, and guys are going to on every screen roll, they're going to go under. You need to know that, right? So those are things that you watch when you watch, whether it's the Pistons. Look, I live in Washington. I watch a lot of Wizards games. The Wizards aren't very good. You know what I mean? You got to know what's going on. You have to see what you have to watch everybody. You have to watch, San Antonio struggled for a large chunk of this season. Now they're playing better, but you have to watch everybody, so I try to watch everybody. I think now I can't speak for every voter, but I think most people watch everybody when it comes down to awards and things like that, because you have to know something about what you're talking about.
So earlier you said the Pistons needed a point guard, DA, and whenever I had you on, whenever this was still Motor City Hoops, we talked about Cade Cunningham and Killian Hayes, and I have to admit, I walked away from that because you were the first guest I'd had on that kind of, I don't want to say you had questions, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're like, we need to see this play out, whether or not it's actually going to work, because a lot of people had talked themselves into it working. We saw Killian eventually move to the second unit coming off the bench. What do you think we've learned about Killian here this season from what you've seen, what you've heard about him?
You can't write the final chapter on a 23-year-old kid, right? I mean, people have to be allowed the chance to grow and develop and get better. Whether it's in Detroit or whether it's somewhere else, it could be somewhere else, right? So I don't think you can just pigeonhole, say Killian Hayes, well, he's a backup point guard now. I don't think that's necessarily true. But I think clearly their future is with Cade, right? So now the question becomes, can Killian be an impactful guard on a second unit, maybe in some circumstances playing in combinations with first team guys? There's still a path there for him. So you don't want to close the door on that, right? I mean, he's too young to give up on him. And again, I hate to answer the question the same way, Bryce, but I think we have to wait and see. We have to see what the best version of him is in the NBA. And I don't think we know that yet. I don't know it. It's still up in the air. I think this is probably, my guess would be, this is probably a better role for him, being a rotational guy as opposed to a foundational guy. You need rotational guys to win.
Yep, absolutely.
So he can help them win, just in a different role. And it's just being great in your role, as coaches say all the time, whatever that role is. And maybe this is a better role for him. But again, there's not enough data yet for me to be able to tell you definitively that's what it is.
Absolutely. There's a big role for him if he runs, quote unquote, runs the second unit, but we've seen him close with the starters in games that he's played well. There's nothing wrong with that. And I agree. I think we still have to go into next year to see if Omari has talked about this, whether the shot comes along or not.
Right. That's a big thing. And also, in fairness to him, it would help if they had better shooters around him, so that would create more opportunities for him as well. So it's it's not just one guy, it's a team. And how does he fit in the team, and how does the team fit with him? So as they continue to put more talent on their team, adding a couple of shooters would be very helpful for the development of a young guard who needs to pass the ball to somebody who will make a shot, because that creates more space for him.
Absolutely. Just overall, you look at this season, Pistons, I believe they're 11-13 since around the All-Star break. Mm-hmm. And you're starting to see signs of this thing turning around. Troy Weaver, he was hired 2 years ago, completely flipped the roster. And things are starting to shift, when you see what the team is doing. They're not getting blown out as often anymore. Right. Just what do you think of the job they've done overall to kind of come in and aggressively remake this roster? And now you have Cade, and you're starting to see the outlines of this becoming something.
What I love about Troy is that Troy is firmly locked into a vision for his team. We will see if it works or not. But what I hate is people who come in and I don't know, we should do that. No, do what you're going to do and see if it works. Blow it up and see if it works. See if what you think works will work. And he's doing that. And I like that. I think you have to be very, not aggressive is a cliche, but you have to be very bold, I think. And if that means trading a bunch of guys for picks or trading a bunch of picks for guys, it doesn't matter, because everything's got to feed into your vision. And he clearly has an idea of the type of team he thinks can win. And he's putting that team together. And so I think they're doing a really good job with that. It's hard to win in this league when you're young. It's really hard. It's just there's so many things going against you. One, institutional knowledge being the first thing. You just when you see a veteran team that's been together, they look like 5 people connected to one another. You watch a team like Miami play defense where the rotations are just so immaculate, right? And so they know exactly where they're supposed to go, and they know exactly how to hedge and get back and recover and all of those things that the Pistons are learning how to do. So if you come back in 3 years, they may be attached and be playing at a much higher level, and they probably will be, right? So I think they're doing a very good job of assembling a team. And again, what I love about Troy is that he does not waver in his convictions about who he likes as players. So Stewart and Sadiq Bey and people like that I think people around the league went, some people didn't like those picks. And clearly those guys have shown that they are really good players and can be part of a winning team down the road. So he knows what he likes in players, and he takes those players. And he doesn't care what people think. People like me think, 3,000 miles away. And that's what a good executive should do. And I like what they've done in that regard.
I was going to follow up. Troy is a DC guy. Of course,
Sure.
You're a DC guy.
Yep.
Just how much did you know about Troy before he got this GM job?
I've known Troy for years and years and years, obviously. Going back to the OKC days and just talking to him about team building and, what he thought when Troy was in OKC and insisted that Westbrook was a point guard. That's the kind of thing where I just go, okay, all right, he's good. This guy knows what he's talking about. Because nobody said that. Everybody said he's an undersized 2. He's going to be, and just imagine if that version of Russell Westbrook had won out and he played in the NBA as an undersized 2, how would that have played? Like that's insane, right? So I know Troy very well, and he's going to, I'm glad he finally got the opportunity because he's deserved it for a long time. And again, I think if you're going to go down doing what you want to do, because they're going to fire you anyway. You know what I mean? So, so you might as well go down doing what you think is right. So, and they're doing that. And I like that in Detroit.
Yeah, I love that he has a vision. We've talked about this before, that the fact that fan base can get behind Troy Weaver and you just know there's a plan in place. And like you said, now it comes down to, does he draft the right guy? Does he make the right free agent signing? Does he make the right trades? And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But before that, DA, I want to ask about Coach Casey, because in all honesty, he takes a lot of heat from the fan base for maybe lack of creativity with his X's and O's. Why are they switching every screen? Which I think that plays into what you talked about with the Miami Heat. When your team isn't connected and veterans and have played together, it's hard to play different coverages. Can you just speak to the fan base about the respect that Coach Casey has around the league and the job he has done this year with a young team that's not winning? And really, there hasn't been a lot of turmoil come out of that locker room.
Yeah, well, when you think about, if you just chase wins and losses, and that's all you judge anybody by, I don't know. It's not an accurate portrayal to me. For him to come into a situation where it was obvious they were going to have to rebuild, and for them to stick with that vision and plan, then the coach knows he's going to wear a lot of L's. He knows it's coming. And you have to, again, have the courage of your convictions to say, it doesn't matter if I take 50 L's this year or 55 L's. We're going to play the right way. We're going to build the right way. We're going to have the right concepts. We're going to continue to work on those concepts until it becomes second nature to us. And Case is so steady in that and so firm in that. And that's what you need from a head coach. You need a coach who doesn't get too high or get too low, who continues to kind of push the rock forward, because it's very difficult It's difficult when you have a team full of really good players and veterans to get 12 guys to pull in the same direction. It's extremely difficult when it's a bunch of kids and they don't know what they're doing and they're trying to get to their second contract. So they got to put up numbers, and wins and losses don't really matter to them, even though they say it does. It doesn't really matter to them, And so for Case to continue to be that steady presence day in and day out is just a testament to who he is as a guy. He's just one of the most righteous guys I've ever dealt with. And I think they're lucky to have him, have them at the beginning of this period. And, as the talent level improves, I think the record will improve. And all of a sudden, Dwayne Casey will be a smart coach again.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the nature of the job.
Yeah. Hey, he's turning these guys into pros because he knows the way it has to be done in the NBA. But we're going to go to a short break right now. When we come back, DA is going to help us take our first look ahead to what the Pistons should be looking to do this offseason.
I'm Alyssa Robinson for the Detroit Free Press. When you wake up every morning, what's the first thing you do? Check your email? Me too. And when you sign up for our daily briefing newsletter, you'll get all the latest news sent directly to your inbox so you can wake up and be ready for the day. We also have newsletters about COVID-19 in Michigan, the latest entertainment headlines, as well as Woodward 248, a newsletter specifically for people living and working in Southeast Oakland County. And don't forget about automotive headlines and all the latest news from our Michigan sports teams. We have a newsletter for every personality and preference. Just head to freep.com/newsletters to sign up for any one of these great options and more.
We're back here on the Pistons Post with a very special guest, David Aldridge. And now we're going to look ahead to the offseason. And DA, what's commonly said about this draft is that it's not quite as strong as the 2021 draft. There's no Cade, there's no Mobley, Green. But you still have some really good guys at the top. Banchero had a really good tournament. Jabari Smith, best shooter in the draft. Chet Holmgren does a little bit of everything, but the main knock on him, of course, is his weight. But when you look at this draft, who sticks out to you, and who's the guy that you think should go number one?
Well, without dodging your question, it depends on who's picking number one. Houston's needs are different from Detroit's needs. Detroit's needs are different from Orlando's needs. So, and if somebody else jumps up, then that changes the calculus completely. I certainly like the talent of Jabari Smith. I certainly think Banchero has a chance to be a really, really good pro. He's a plug-and-play guy. He plays tomorrow night if he's drafted today. I think Holmgren's got a chance. I've watched him a few times. Certainly, the body it's a concern because usually somebody who's coming into the draft physically is big somewhere. They have big shoulders, broad shoulders, big chest, their leg. I remember Yao Ming when he came in, and did the workout for everybody before the draft. And he just had these massive legs and, and calves. And you realize, okay, he'll be able to hold his position in the paint. He won't get pushed around. The issue with Chet is just that he just seems so thin everywhere in his body, in his upper body, his lower body. And you just worry about just his ability to kind of handle the day in, day out grind of leaning on a guy and being leaned on and being able to kind of do your work early and push a guy out. I don't know if he can do that, but he is so skilled that you still have to take the shot, right? You have to take the shot because he's so skilled at 7'1". I don't know if I'd take him if I were Detroit, but somebody should take him high because if you have a plan in place, can he get to? I don't know what they list him at Gonzaga. Could he get
195?
To I'd say yeah, he's under 200 for sure right now.
Can
DA
he get to 230 in 4 years? Maybe, maybe. And could I live with him at 230? Maybe he's a 4 in the NBA. You know what I mean? Like at 230 pounds, he's probably okay. So I certainly would be intrigued by him. I think you have to have a real plan in place. You have to really say, this is how we're going to attack it and build it with him. And not just in terms of physical development, but also how you're going to play him, where you're going to play him, how many minutes you're going to play him. I mean, I think you have to have a real plan in place. But I don't think the draft is as bad as people are making it out to be. I think the top 3 or 4 picks are going to be pretty good, actually. Now, there's some drop-off, as there always is after the top guys. But I think this draft is going to be okay. I think there's some good talent in it. You know, a guy like Matherin at
Yes.
Arizona is a big time talent. That kid can play. You know, he's a good player. So there's some good talent, I think, at the top of the draft, and people are going to get some good players, I think.
Pistons are on the clock at number 1, and Troy Weaver calls David Aldridge. So who are you taking, DA? Who are you telling him to take? Who is the best fit for the Pistons between Jabari Smith Jr.? Because you mentioned shooting earlier, and nobody does it better than him. But Paolo Banchero could be a secondary playmaker along with Cade. And who are you telling Troy Weaver to take for the Pistons?
Oh, I'm taking Jabari Smith, and I'm not thinking twice.
Okay.
Not even close to me. Like, that's the no-brainer pick of all if I'm Detroit. Like, this kid is an elite shooter, elite level shooter with size, can rebound some, you know, not a prodigious rebounder, but I think he can rebound his position well enough. If he's not quite a plug and play, he'll play very early. I take him. He fits the bill exactly of what the Pistons need, which is shooting. They need people who can shoot. And this kid is a elite level, Durant level shooter. You just take him. You don't even think about it.
So real quick, because you mentioned Benedict Mathurin, that's a guy I've slowly gotten higher on, and everybody loves. I think there was a stat thing that compared him to KCP, and everybody's saying he's KCP 2.0, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I think there's a higher ceiling for Ben Math than that. Like, if that's his floor, like, okay, fine. But I think there's a higher ceiling for Ben. I really like him. What do you see about Benedict Mathurin that you like?
No disrespect to KCP, but I think Matherin's a much more skilled offensive player than KCP is. You know, I mean, I think he is a big time talent. I think he would be an exceptional combo guard in the league. You may not have him on the ball all the time, but he certainly should have the ball in his hands a lot. But I think you could certainly play him at the 2, and he could coming off screens and pin downs and things like that. He'd be excellent with it, I think. So I think he's a really talented kid, and could certainly and will certainly play right away, I think, for basically any team that takes him at the top of the lottery, unless it's Cleveland, maybe, you know, I mean, then they're not going to be in the lottery. So, I don't see any team that I think will be in the top 8 that takes him that he wouldn't play right away. And I think conceivably start and play well. I mean, I think he's got that kind of capability.
Outside of that top 4, I guess for most people that would be Jabari, Chet, Paolo, and then Jaden Ivey. Who's in sort of the next best prospects for you? I'm sure Mathurin's probably in that group, but who else kind of sticks out if the Pistons were in that 4, 5, 6 spot? There's
a few guys that I like. I'm still in the process of kind of weeding that out. I do love the what's his name? The kid from Iowa.
DA, come on. Gosh.
Yeah, you don't like him?
Murray loves Keegan Murray.
Yeah, I like Murray a lot. I think Murray's going to be pretty good. Is he going to be a star? No. I don't think he's going to be a star, but I think he's going to be a really good player. I think he's a good, again, rotational players matter in this league. You win with rotational players. Your 6 through 9s are what win championships for you, to me. Because most good teams have a great starting lineup. Where you win is when you have incredible depth. And I don't want to sell Murray short. I think he's, a really talented guy. So, I mean, I think he's pretty good, guys. I mean, I don't. What don't you like about him?
No, I think it's that, DA. And I guess where I'm at is I think I would rather go ahead and swing for the fences a little bit, because I think the Pistons need a number 2 option. And for me, I don't know where I sit with Sadiq Bey if he's a number 3 guy on a playoff team. So, I would honestly, you're going to think I'm crazy maybe, but I would just go ahead and draft Shaedon Sharpe if he enters.
If he comes out.
He comes out, just because I think that's what the Pistons need. But I understand, it's not a knock on Keegan Murray as much as okay, yeah, they could use that, but I would rather go ahead and take a chance on a guy who may end up being the number 2 guy behind Cade, I guess.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I understand that. And it's interesting with Sharpe. You just don't. Nobody seems to know definitively what he's going to do. So, and it's kind of unusual at this late stage. I like AJ Griffin. I don't know if I love AJ Griffin, but I can obviously see the skill level. He can obviously play at a high level. I was a little worried about Agbaji, because he didn't have a great tournament, but in the Final Four, he played extremely well. He did, and really and that's why, I always look at guys on when the brightest light, the biggest stage that they can play in, where they're playing right now. How did they play? And that's why I was wrong about Greg Oden, because Greg Oden was awesome in the championship game against Florida. And I thought he would be a great pro, and it just didn't work out. Agbaji played extremely well in the Final Four, so I don't have any great concerns about him anymore. I think he's a pretty good guy. I tell you who really impressed me was Mark Williams.
Yeah,
the big from Duke. He is long as all get out, and so I think he could be a late lottery pick. It would not surprise me at all, because a guy that can block shots and rebound and has some offensive capability as he does, that's a guy that a lot of teams are going to look at, I think, pretty highly in the top half of the first round.
DA, we're going to move on to free agency really quickly. But one thing you brought up, and I've made this point as well, just as far as the approach to the draft, and also why I like Murray so much, just because I think he's going to come in and he's going to be able to contribute to winning almost immediately, is you do need those rotational guys. You look at the Phoenix Suns, who it seems like they had to rebuild for 9-10 years before they finally broke through. They had several top 5 picks that didn't pan out. They had Josh Jackson. You just look up and down the list, and what ends up bringing them back is you have Devin Booker, who I think went 13. Ayton, of course, was number 1. But he's their third best player. And then you trade for Chris Paul. But it's the guys like Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson, late lottery picks who can just come in and they can play and contribute to winning. And taking swings is good, but I think more often than not, when you look at rebuilding teams and how they get to a point where they can contend for a championship, it's just they get those picks right year after year. You look at the Grizzlies with Desmond Bane, or even Milwaukee, and they didn't draft Chris Middleton, but he's a second-round pick, and you trade for him in the Brandon Jennings trade, and he becomes an all-star. Is there merit to that for the Pistons? Just get a guy that could play, and everything else, you could figure it out eventually.
Absolutely. No, if you keep adding good players, that, you raise your floor. Now, your ceiling is raised by great players, but your floor is raised by good players. So the more good players you have, the better chance you have of being more competitive, game in and game out. And so certainly, yeah. You mentioned a guy like Cam Johnson, who they killed Phoenix when most people did. I did not. I will wear that one proudly. I've gotten some wrong, as I mentioned, but I also have gotten some right. Good basketball players. And I have come to believe it does matter. I think if you're coming from a good program, I think that does matter in the NBA, because the good programs have standards, I think, and they don't waver from those standards as they build toward championships. And so, whether it's a Carolina or Duke or Arizona or Gonzaga, North, teams.
Villanova put a lot of good players.
Exactly. Villanova, the type of kid you're getting from Jay Wright for almost always. So, yeah, I think that does matter. I think that's important. And so if a guy comes out, if it's 2 guys and I'm looking at them, one of those guys has played at a high level in a prestige program, then I probably will lean towards that guy. So, but it does, to your point, it doesn't matter where you draft him. Giannis Antetokounmpo was the 15th pick in the draft. So it doesn't matter where Jokic was a 2nd-round pick. It does not matter where you get him, but you have to get him wherever you get him. So 1st pick, 8th pick, 15th pick, doesn't matter.
Let's talk just the offseason in general, get away from the draft a little bit. And a guy that did not get moved at the trade deadline, DA, I'm sure you know who I'm going to talk about, and that's Jerami Grant, a guy from the DMV. We've talked about him before. What do you think the Pistons should do with Jerami Grant? Do you think they should just hold on to him, continue? Because we just talked about, right, good player. Jerami Grant is a good player. Now, he's a good player that's going to demand a pretty big contract, it sounds like.
That's the problem.
What would you do with Jerami Grant, or what would it take for you to trade him if you did think, all right, maybe we need to move him?
See, this is a hard decision. This is not an easy decision, because good kid, plays hard, helps you win, but it just comes down to how much money can you put into someone who is a good player, but not a great player, right? And that's the problem. It's the issue. He's a perfect world borderline all-star. Yeah. I mean, you can make that argument. But is he an elite player? I don't even think Jerami would say he's an elite level player, right? So, the money gets so high at the NBA level. And then does that keep you from facilitating other trades that could help you down the road? And so when you're locked in, that's the problem. And I think that's why you heard his name mentioned in trade rumors, because he is looking for a big payday. And he should. He's earned that. I just don't know if it should be in Detroit. It maybe have to be somewhere else. So it will not shock me if that trade is made at some point this offseason, just because I'm not sure. Timing is everything. It just so happens that he is coming up on a free agency situation pretty soon and wants to get paid. And so, it just may not be the Pistons that can do that for him, because as they're building, and you never know when the opportunity comes to bring in via trade a big time player. It just sometimes it just happens. Bad playoffs, but chemistry issues, whatever. And so you want to keep your fluidity cap wise open. So that's why his name's been out there. And it's unfortunate, but that's the nature of the business with regard to good players who have value around the league, because there's a lot of people that would love to have Jerami Grant on their team.
How would you, if you're calling the shots for the Pistons, for you, kind of what looks like a perfect offseason for them? They have a high pick, they have cap space, and then they have an asset in Jerami Grant who could get you maybe a pick back or another good young player. Beyond the draft, sort of what do you think they should prioritize a free agency, and what would you look for in a Jerami Grant trade?
As much shooting as humanly possible, I think should be priority one, in trying to find people that can stretch the floor, and again, create space for Cunningham and Hayes and anybody else who's handling the ball to create and make plays. I just think in this day, the way the game's played now, spacing the floor is the number one thing that every team has to be able to do credibly, right? Yeah, everybody spaces the floor, but I don't have to guard the guy that's shooting 30% on threes. I'll live if he makes a couple. I don't care. But if he's shooting 41, I got to go guard him. So that's the number one, priority for every team. I certainly think if I'm Detroit in free agency, I'm looking at, I don't have any particular names coming to mind, but, certainly shooting is a priority, is a premium for me. Well, I tell you, a guy like a Malik Monk, for example, showed you last year what, that he was for real in terms of or this past year with the Lakers. Now, the Lakers are going to really try to re-sign him, and you don't want to get into a bidding war and all that sort of thing. But that's the kind of guy that I think could help in free agency for Detroit, a guy that really tilts the floor in his direction when he's on the floor, because you have to guard him.
I like that. That's a name that I've seen brought up just a little bit. I've talked to some people that have brought up Malik Monk. We got to ask you this, because I know the fan base is going to want to hear your take on it. Jalen Brunson. That's a name that has been talked a lot about with the Detroit Pistons. So we'll get you out of here with this one, DA. But Jalen Brunson, let's just say the Mavericks are going to let him walk. Let's say the contract makes sense. Let's just talk fit. Do you like that fit with Jalen Brunson next to Cade Cunningham?
Honestly, I'm not sure I do. Because I think the best version of both of those guys is with the ball in their hands. And so I always say, okay, so who's coming off? Who are you running the pin down for if those are your two guards? And is Jalen coming off a pin down or Cade Cunningham coming off a pin down the best way to utilize those guys? I don't think it is. I could be wrong. I mean, I just, I think we've seen with Jalen in Dallas that he is a really good lead point guard. Could he be a combo guard? Yes. But is that the best? Again, if I'm going to spend a lot of money to bring in Jalen Brunson, I want to bring in Jalen Brunson. You know what I mean? So I'm not sure on a team that has a legit lead guard going forward now in Cade Cunningham, if that's the best partner with him. I could be wrong, but when you ask me the question, I don't see those two guys as a natural fit with one another. I think they would. I just don't see it. I could be wrong. I don't think that's the best utilization of both of their skills.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense because, like you said, if you're going to pay Jalen Brunson probably what you're going to have to pay him,
exactly.
You want, like you said, the best version of Jalen Brunson, and that probably has the ball in his hand just a little bit more. DA, we're going to let you go. Man, this was awesome. We had a blast. Thank you so much for your time. We know how busy you are, and we had to get you in before the playoffs because it's about to get real busy for you. It's going to be an exciting time, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and best of luck with everything. It's going to be just the period in the NBA right now. It's going to be a great playoff. So,
my pleasure, guys. Thank you for having me.
After this break, we're going to give our takeaways from the Pistons exit interviews on Monday, so stay with us.
All right, hey, Carlos, just a quick idea. How about if I say, hey, this is Sean Windsor, and you say, hey, this is Carlos Smaros, and I'll go, and then we'll go back. You want to try that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
Hey, this is Sean Windsor.
And this is Carlos Benares.
And we are the team behind Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean, where we are going to talk about, you guessed it, sports, but lots of other stuff. Like what, Carlos?
Oh, we're going to talk about your favorite subject, Sean, food. Probably more food. Arts, culture, sports, TV, movies, you name it. If it's happened in Detroit, we're going to talk about it.
And sometimes we're going to have guests in who obviously know a lot more than we do about just about everything. But we're going to have some free press journalists to talk about big stories, folks from the sports world. We're going to be out every Thursday. You can find this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We hope you'll join us.
So we are back from the break, and we just wanted to say again, first of all, big thanks to David Aldridge, of course, a legend in NBA media. He's somebody that I got to know a little bit during my 2 years at The Athletic, and he's always a great person to talk to. But Bryce, you're actually the one that set this David Aldridge interview up, and I think you should go ahead and inform us on how that connection came about.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. You know, it's one of the perks of playing college basketball, the people you get to meet. And I've got to meet a lot of really, really cool people. And DA is an American University alum, as I mentioned early in the episode. And he was there at games whenever we were having success. My 2 years, it was my junior year. I was a transfer JUCO kid, but was the first time in school history AU had made the tournament. So DA came around to some of those games and, you know, probably the most famous alum in American University history. So it's just cool that I told someone today, he's such a down to earth guy. So like he'll communicate with me, and it's unbelievable because you think about those guys, they're famous, right? Like the guys I coach, my high school team, they're like, yeah, we know David Aldridge. He's the guy on NBA 2K or whatever that does the sideline interviews. Like he's the voice on the game. So he's this famous person, but he just talks hoops as he did in segments 1 and 2, but he'll do that with me just in general. So it's been really cool to know him and to just stay in touch. Like he doesn't have to do that. So it means a lot that he's willing to do that.
Yeah, I actually didn't know the full David Aldridge connection either, other than the fact that you both went to American. So that's awesome. I also like that him and Troy Weaver are DC guys, and he actually had some insight there. That was a complete stab in the dark for the accent, but I didn't sure what he would say. So I really liked his answer.
I asked him about that when he had come on Motor City Hoops. You know, Jerami Grant went to high school out there. Luka Garza went to high school out there, and then Troy Weaver. So I knew that he had some connections to some of those different places. So it is cool when he comes on to talk to Detroit Pistons that he has those connections from those guys being from that same area.
And just from the conversations I've had with Troy over the 2 years since he's been general manager, I think everybody involved in basketball in DC knows each other or knows somebody that knows somebody. So it seems like that DC web is very connected and very deep. But speaking of Troy, he has a big decision coming up again this offseason. Pistons locked in the number 3 pick. I know Pistons fans were really happy that Tyrese Maxey shook off that slow start on Sunday and did what he had to do to help the Pistons secure the third best odds. And I stated last week on the pod, like I don't think it matters that much. Like it does matter, but at the same time, it's not like it is what it is. But they do have the same odds as the top 2 teams for that number 1 pick. And that's what's important, especially in this draft where it's just better to there's no top prospect, but it's just better to be able to take your pick. And in this draft, you could even justify, I think, trading down easily.
That's definitely something I want to talk about as we move forward. We're not going to get to it on this episode, Omari, but I think playing out some of those scenarios is going to be a lot of fun. And just to throw out the numbers for everybody, 52.1% finishing in the top 4, 14.8% chance of 5th. The best actual individual spot is actually 26% at finishing 6th in the lottery. And then there's a 7% chance of finishing 7th. So the Pistons still could theoretically fall to 7. It's not very likely they could, but there's a chance. The best actual chance of any individual spot is actually 6th. Before I let you respond to that, Omari, I do want to do something. Last week, we didn't have any new comments, but this week we did from Mike D from Detroit. I think this is somebody that follows us on Twitter as well. So really appreciated this. Love to give shout outs to anybody who gives some feedback. And he says, these guys obviously put in the work. The pod is thoughtful and a mix of objective and fan focus. That's hard to achieve. 5 stars are handed out to a lot of podcasts. This one deserves it. It truly, I know Omari and I always say this, but it really is nice to see those things. As soon as I see it, I screenshot it. I send it into the group message between me, Omari, and Wes. Still trying to get Wes to get an iPhone to get rid of all that green and all of that. But we always I send it right away, and then we always talk about it and how it makes us feel good that people are recognizing it and liking what they're hearing.
And they're always so in depth too. It's never a comment that's just like, this is a good pod, or I like these guys. It's always like a paragraph, just like waxing poetic about how good the pod is. And this is, it's episode 7. I think we first started doing something like this. You don't know exactly how it's going to go, especially, at the point we launched. Like, we kind of started after All-Star break. There's no intrigue anymore. It's just waiting for the season to end. But the numbers have been good. The engagement's been good. So we appreciate it.
I mean, we did have the one rating where they were not happy with us and the amount of time between the trailer and the first episode. So if you look at Apple Podcasts, we do have a 1 star on there because someone did not like that we hadn't put out an episode in 2 weeks. Even though, my friend, I hope you're a listener. I hope that you listened to the trailer and we just hadn't released anything yet. But did have to just joke about that a little. We had a good laugh last week, me, Wes, and Omari, so I did have to bring it up. And
I will say we have 4.9 stars out of 5, and we don't have 5 stars because of that. So I hope that person's proud of themselves. They ruin perfection.
Let's get to the story from Monday. And you spent all afternoon, I assume, in that interview room, Omari, as they did the exit interviews. It was just the players, right? Did Coach Casey, GM Troy Weaver were not part of that, just the players?
It was just players on Monday, and we're actually going to talk to Dwayne and Troy on Tuesday, which makes sense for them to do it the day after the players. Bad for the pod because the episode comes out before they talk. So maybe it'll still be relevant a week after. We'll just have to see. And just quick insight into the life of a beat writer. Like, at a game Sunday night, obviously, we were in Philly. Went to bed a little late. Had to wake up early, like 5:30, to catch a early flight, like an 8 a.m. flight. Get back to Detroit like 10:14. Get back to my apartment at 11, and I'm at the Pistons practice facility at noon until like 4:30, talking to almost all the players on the roster.
And then you've been writing articles.
Yeah, then I write my story, and then I text Bryce and Wes, let's finish the pod. So, long day, but I will say, I think exit interviews are fun, especially for a young team, just to, there's a lot of progress to be made. I've only covered young teams. Of course, I covered the Grizzlies as well. So I can't really compare it to maybe a veteran team where things are more set and the offseason expectation is purely focused on what we can do next season. There was a lot of that for the Pistons, but also just a lot of, I need to get better here. I need to get better there. But I would say the biggest topic just from everything that happened today is Cade Cunningham, which makes sense. I mean, he's the number 1 pick. He's the guy people are most curious about. And just the way his teammates just talked him up so much, it's just clear that not only is he obviously extremely talented, like one of the guys who are in the conversation for Rookie of the Year, but he really does have the respect of this team. I'm not going to read the entire comment just because it was so long, but Corey, I thought what he had to say about Cade was just but he just said he's beyond his years. He's already a star, but he's going to be a superstar in this league sooner rather than later. He's an amazing talent. We all know what he can do with the basketball. He doesn't get sped up. Mentally, he's there every possession, every play, and he wants it in those big moments. He led our rookies in clutch points. Like Frank Jackson, Kelly, like all these guys, like they just had amazing things to say about Cade. And, as a fan, it's got to feel good. You're on Twitter, you're seeing all the things coming out, and like they're just gassing this dude up, right? Like you're like, oh, okay, we have a guy. Like he's not only talented, but he's like the guy on the team. Like that was my main takeaway from today, honestly.
Yeah, and that's super impressive. That's been one thing, that his maturity and his ability to come in, be a leader of men. Like he is 20 years old and he came in and was a leader of men, of veterans. You're talking about Corey Joseph, right? Like no matter what the fan base wants to think about Corey Joseph, he's a 10-year vet. So for him to just say like, Cade is that dude, that means something. Same thing with Jerami and KO down the line. What I took away from Cade was a quote from him where he talked about his mind was racing after every game, growing up, and the thought of playing against Kevin Durant and him going at him. And he ended it. He says, it's still surreal to me. I don't want to take anything away from Cade, but you can imagine your first year in the league, there's a little bit of, I don't want to say he was starstruck because in no way was he ever that way, but I think we can see a little bit of different mentality next year. I'm sure it was a little surreal all of a sudden when you're playing against these dudes, and it won't be that next year because now he's been through it.
And I think that's been a cool aspect of this season is just the relationship that Cade has with Kevin Durant, which predates his time with the Pistons this season. But KD, like he really is a guy that'll give you his props if he respects you. And he really does respect Cade. And the times that they played this season, I think were two of the most memorable games this season. That first Brooklyn game, which was back in, I think, November. They're going shot for shot in the fourth quarter. And then that game a couple of weeks ago, I think on March 29th, Cade, I mean, that was probably his best game of the season, right? Like he ties the season high, but he scores 29 of his 34 in the second half. I think he scored like 17 in like the final 6 minutes of the game or something, and he just completely takes over. So it's funny when you hear a guy as good as Cade say that it's surreal and you don't expect to do this and that, because it's like pretty good at basketball, man. So it has to cross your mind at some point that this could happen. But that's been pretty consistent with Cade all season too. Just him saying like, this is surreal. Like I don't take it for granted. This is something you work for, but it doesn't always pan out. Like we've had a lot of guys who, went number one, number two, whatever, that just washed out of the league for whatever reason. And it seems highly unlikely that that's going to happen to Cade. But just the gratitude that's there, I think has been really interesting to hear all season.
It's amazing. He's so humble. He's so mature, but then he's still so confident on the floor. Like that's what is special about Cade Cunningham is you can be humble, but like you got to be a dog on the court. You got to think you're the best player on the floor. And he just seems to have that perfect mixture. He also got Pistons Twitter lit up on Monday afternoon. And I don't know if it was about the Rookie of the Month thing or whatever, but all he tweeted out was Detroit versus everybody, and everybody was fired up about it. And then Paolo Banchero and Jabari Smith Jr. liked it. So now that's all over the timeline.
Yeah, I actually saw that right before we started doing this segment. And it's really cool. I mean, like, it is cool. Honestly, I think, like, this process of Detroit becoming, like, this cool place, at least from what I noticed, from, like, just a Pistons basketball standpoint, I think the going to work era was always cool for a lot of fans who grew up around that era. Like me, like I was 10 years old when they won the championship in 2004. But that Bad Boys doc, like I know when Isaiah Stewart came in, he talked about the Bad Boys doc. Cade Cunningham talked about it. And now the Pistons have their first true superstar. I mean, like you could put Blake Griffin in that area, but if you're talking about just a homegrown player, really Cade's the first one since Grant Hill. And you can see him kind of becoming like that kind of new focal point, for what other players, what other fans kind of see the Pistons as. So, yeah, I mean, with two of the top three prospects of the draft, like KS Detroit versus everybody tweet, that obviously bodes well.
That can't it can't be a bad sign, Omari. It can't be a bad sign.
No, not at all.
I mean, we talk about his gravity on the court. He's got gravity off the court too. People gravitate to this dude. Like I feel like I overstate it, but I truly believe like he's just special in that way. And that's why, again, I don't care whether he wins Rookie of the Year. He was absolutely the number one pick, and he's going to be the best player in this draft. Continuing with Cade Cunningham was a quote from Killian Hayes, and he said, in terms of playing with Cade, this summer I'm going to focus on catch and shoot and playing off the ball. I think we play well together. I think it's important that I don't want to read into this stuff too much, but it's important that Killian realizes this. It's something you've talked about, Omari, that's the number one thing he's got to be able to do better. We talked to DA earlier in the episode about this, but I think it's important for Killian to realize I'm not going to have the ball in my hands if I'm on the floor with Cade Cunningham. I better be able to shoot it.
And I think that's been an underrated storyline this season, is just Killian's awareness that this is Cade's team. Even though Killian was the 7th pick, he's very aware that he has things he has to work on. But more importantly, he has to fit in with Cade. Like, Killian is very aware that this is Cade's team. And while, I mean, we've seen Killian and Cade close games this season, win games, closing games out together. So it's not like they're just completely incompatible with each other. I mean, I think, Cade can play with anybody, and Killian, just being the defender and passer that he is. And of course, he started finishing at the rim a lot better this past month. There's some synergy there, but Killian knows he has to become a much better shooter. He can't shoot below 30% for the 3rd year in a row, and really he needs to get above 33 just to become a semblance of a threat to where guys are going to start closing out on him. And he knows that. He worked with his 3-point shot last year, didn't really translate this year, but he's just very aware of that. I'm not going to keep repeating myself and say he's aware, but he knows what he has to do, and I think that bodes well. Whether Killian starts or comes off the bench, either way, he knows that the Pistons are going to make moves and decide rotations based on how guys work with Cade. So he said it again today. Whether it works out for Killian or not, it just bodes well in general that he's aware that that's something he needs to do.
And one final one before we finish off the episode. And you talked about how it's kind of fun to think about the Pistons in Detroit, and there's this energy, even though they just had a not super successful season in terms of wins. Marvin Bagley III. When I got here, the spirits were high in the locker room. We took every game seriously. Probably the most fun I've had playing the game, and that's how it's supposed to feel. Now, maybe he's taking a little bit of a jab at the Sacramento Kings, but Marvin Bagley saying, I had fun playing with the Detroit Pistons. I had fun. I assume he's probably, talking about Cade Cunningham a little bit. Again, this stuff matters, and it's exciting to hear that from Marvin Bagley III, but just in general.
And I think the thing about Marvin, whenever a guy comes in at the trade deadline, you don't know exactly how it's going to go, especially a guy like Marvin, where he's obviously talented. He was the number 2 pick, but he's been injured, and he was in a situation in Sacramento where they were not utilizing him correctly, and he had just clearly fallen out of favor. You never know how a guy's going to come in and how he's going to fit in and if he'll find his groove immediately or not. But I thought Marvin figured things out pretty well, and part of that was because he had a motivation to do it. Getting the fresh start that he needed. But also just, and I asked him about this during the press conference, having guys like Killian and Cade who could utilize you correctly. You're a rim runner, you're a lob threat. The Pistons hadn't had that. And you could just see how much it opened things up. And we talked about the vertical spacing on here, but just how much it relieved pressure from Killian and for Cade to where the defense can't overcommit because you're going to give up a dunk every single time. You can just see immediately that there is chemistry there. And yeah, I mean, and Marvin, I couldn't tell you how many lobs he had in Sacramento this past season, but I know he had more dunks with the Pistons in way fewer games than he had with Sacramento this season. And it just makes sense. And I think Killian and Cade were a big part of that, just having 2 guards who you can synergize with and can get you the ball where you want it.
Absolutely. And I think the big thing with Bagley is going to be what's the contract? How's that going to shake out? I know he's a restricted free agent, the qualifying offer, the cap hold, all of that. I would like to see it be a longer-term contract, but we can talk about that on future episodes. We'll get plenty into the draft as we come up over the next few weeks, even more into the offseason and free agency, but that'll do it for now on this episode of the Pistons Pulse.
So thanks once again to all of our listeners, and big thanks to our editor, Kerry Jr. II, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our executive producer, Kirkland Crawford. Also, big thanks to our guy, Wes Davenport, who puts together all the outlines, and this pod would not be that smooth as it is without him. So thanks again, and tune in next week.